68 years ago, a 5-year-old girl vanished without a trace on her way to school in Mill Creek, Pennsylvania, leaving her family shattered and an entire community gripped by panic. Authorities suspected the neighbor who worked as a mechanic, the same man who abruptly left town right after the incident. But with no body recovered and far too little evidence to pursue, the investigation eventually stalled. Yet through all those years, the desperate mother never gave up hope, clinging to the fragile belief that her daughter was still alive somewhere. Then one day, when an investigative journalist reopened the old case file, she uncovered one critical detail that everyone had overlooked. A detail that could turn the entire case upside down and shock the world in a way no one saw coming. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you like this video, don't forget to hit subscribe. In 1957, Mill Creek, a small town nestled among the hills of Pennsylvania, moved to the slow rhythm of post-war America. Wooden houses lined the dusty, coal-dusted main road, where people still greeted each other with a nod every morning, and kids rode their bikes past the old post office on their way to school. On the edge of town, the Thompson family lived in a white-painted house with a weathered tin roof. Thomas Thompson, a former soldier, now worked as a steelworker in Altoona. He rose early, brewed strong black coffee, and quietly got ready for his shift. His wife Margaret gave piano lessons from home and occasionally taught the neighborhood kids a few basic notes. She was a patient, orderly woman who loved cleaning and jotting everything down in a little notebook. Between them was their only daughter, 5-year-old Mia Thompson, with gray eyes and blonde hair always tied with a pink ribbon. She was lively, loved to draw, and had a habit of carrying a small sketchbook to capture anything that caught her eye. That morning, the sky was clear, a light mist still clinging to the grass. The radio played a children's program, while the smell of coffee filled the kitchen. Margaret fixed breakfast, Thomas read the Huntingdon Daily News, and Mia ate while asking her dad if he had the night shift that day. After the meal, Thomas kissed his daughter on the forehead before heading out. Margaret retied the bow in Mia's hair, helped her put on her backpack, and wheeled the little red bicycle, a recent birthday gift, out to the yard. The dirt road to school ran between 2 rows of maple trees, just over a mile from the house. Mia usually rode alone, stopping now and then to pick flowers or wave to familiar faces along the way. Mrs. Emma Fielding, a neighbor 2 houses down, was watering her plants on the porch when she saw Mia's tiny figure ride past. Behind her, an old green pickup slowed down, then turned onto a parallel side road. She only glanced at it, assuming it was a delivery truck. The rest of the morning unfolded normally in town. Margaret taught her first piano lesson of the day, the notes drifting out through the open windows. When noon approached, she got up to prepare lunch and suddenly noticed an unusual quiet in the house. Habit made her glance at the wall clock. Too much time had passed. Mia should have been home by now. She threw on a coat, stepped outside, and walked the familiar road. The sun slanted through the trees, the ground covered in dry leaves. Margaret called her daughter's name, calmly at first, then with growing urgency. No answer. The wind carried her voice into the empty air. She passed the small bridge, reached the turn where the dirt road entered the woods. Beneath an oak tree, something pink stood out against the earth, the familiar ribbon she had tied in Mia's hair that morning. Dust clung to the fabric, one edge slightly torn. Margaret bent down, picked it up, her hands trembling violently. She looked around for the small bicycle tracks, but saw only faint marks that disappeared around the bend. She hurried to Mrs. Fielding's house. The neighbor said she hadn't noticed anything unusual except the green truck that morning. In that moment, cold terror flooded through her. Margaret walked faster, then nearly ran back home, calling Mia's name the whole way. The front door was ajar, the house still smelling of old coffee. She grabbed the phone, her palms slick with sweat, voice breaking as she asked the operator to connect her to the Mill Creek police. The call from the Thompson house reached the Mill Creek police switchboard early that afternoon. In the small station office, The phone rang while Sheriff Robert Haynes was reviewing administrative files. He heard a panicked, broken voice repeating that her little girl was missing. Haynes told her to stay calm, took the address, and asked for a brief description of the child. The moment he hung up, he and two young deputies, Edward Marsh and Gordon Pike, jumped into the patrol car. Mill Creek was still peaceful, the little shops open as usual. No one yet knew the event that would soon upend life here had begun. The police car turned into the residential area and stopped in front of the Thompsons' white wooden house. Margaret met them on the porch, pale as a ghost, still clutching the pink ribbon. She led them down the narrow road her daughter took to school. Haynes walked slowly, examining the damp ground. The road led to the edge of town, flanked by shedding maple trees and rolling hills in the distance. A few hundred yards from the house, they found Mia's small bicycle tipped over beside the grass, the front wheel still spinning slightly in the breeze. Next to it lay her dirty cloth doll, one arm coming unstitched. No blood, no signs of a struggle, no scraps of clothing or foreign objects. Everything looked like a scene simply abandoned, too quiet to not be terrifying. Haynes had Marsh measure the distance from the bike to the road's edge, while Pike took notes. Margaret stood behind them, eyes fixed on the grass. Haynes marked the bicycle's position with a pencil and stuck a small wooden stake in the ground to define the scene. An area roughly 30 yards wide was cordoned off with caution tape. He crouched to examine the road, large, deep tire tracks pressed into the damp dirt, pointing toward the thin woods. The impressions were fresh, not yet erased by wind. He had Marsh photograph them and marked spots for soil samples. There were no clear adult footprints besides their own. Wind blew dry leaves across the scene, gradually covering everything. Haynes ordered the scene preserved and radioed the station for more officers and a proper camera. When the technicians arrived, they collected soil samples, fibers from the doll, and dirt from the bike frame. Margaret stood silently at the edge of the tape, hands clenched. A female officer took basic information, height, clothing, items Mia had with her. Margaret answered in fragments, almost whispering. News of the disappearance spread fast. Local reporters showed up, taking notes and photos, their cars lining the road. Haynes kept them back, but camera shutters still clicked. Curious residents gathered, some bringing dogs to help search informally. The sheriff temporarily halted all traffic within 200 yards of the bicycle until the official search team arrived. A quick scene diagram was sketched. Evidence collected: bicycle, doll, hair ribbon, suspicious tire tracks, and soil showing possible movement. Everything was numbered and sealed. As afternoon light slanted through the trees, the area was ringed with yellow tape, looking like a sudden wound in the town's peaceful landscape. Haynes looked around. No one dared speak loudly. He stepped outside the tape and wrote in his notebook, "Female child, age 5, missing, cause unknown. High probability of abduction." Investigation file opened. At the end of the road, the distant church bell rang, cutting through the heavy air that had settled over Mill Creek, marking the moment the case officially became an open investigation. That same afternoon, police began taking statements from anyone near the area where the bicycle was found. Emma Fielding was the first witness. She said that while watering flowers that morning, she saw Mia ride past, followed by an old, dark green pickup, moving unusually slowly on the narrow road. The driver wore a cap, his face hidden beneath the windshield shadow. She heard no horn or anything alarming, so she assumed it was an electric company or delivery truck. The next statement came from Bill Granger, who owned a small farm about half a mile from the scene. He said that around the same time, while working in the horse barn, he heard a loud truck engine start then suddenly cut off, as if someone had killed it in the middle of the road. When he stepped outside, the road was empty. Only wind and birds in the trees. Both statements matched in timing and direction, convincing police the green pickup was the most crucial lead. At Mill Creek headquarters, Haynes ordered a list of every similar truck registered within a 30-mile radius. After 3 hours, The list was narrowed to 11 vehicles. One was a 1956 Ford F-100 registered to Henry Collins, a resident of the neighboring town. Records showed Collins was 28, a mechanic at a garage near Huntingdon, and had previously lived just a few streets from the Thompsons. Neighbors confirmed he knew the family. He had fixed Thomas's car a few times and had watched Mia occasionally when Margaret was teaching piano. Police went to Collins's house that same afternoon. The small house sat at the end of the main street, the front yard cluttered with mechanical tools. The moss green pickup was parked in the garage, its bed still streaked with old oil. Collins remained calm when questioned, saying he had worked the night shift and come home to sleep after 8 a.m. Haynes asked to verify the alibi. A call to the garage confirmed Collins had worked the night shift but left early, around 6:30 a.m., claiming a headache. That left the window between 7 and 9 a.m., exactly when Mia disappeared, with no witness to his whereabouts. When asked about the truck, Collins insisted he hadn't driven it that morning. Yet when police checked, the engine was still warm, proving recent use. Haynes had every detail documented, the truck photographed, and soil samples taken from the tires. Inside the house, nothing suspicious was found except a small framed photo on the workbench showing Mia at her birthday party a few months earlier. Collins said it was an old gift from the Thompsons he had forgotten to return. The interview was brief. Collins showed no resistance, but multiple parts of his statement contradicted the initial evidence. Haynes placed Henry Collins at the top of the suspect list and sent requests to compare tire tread and timing with the tracks at the scene. As the investigation team left the house, the Mill Creek sky had turned bronze, evening mist beginning to settle. The temporary file noted, male 28, mechanic, known to victim vehicle matches description, alibi inconsistent with timeline. None of them said it out loud, but they all felt something inexplicable starting to take shape from the scattered fragments of that peaceful morning. The next morning, state police were called in to assist, coordinating with the local fire department, K-9 units, and dozens of civilian volunteers. A temporary command center was set up in the Mill Creek High School stadium parking lot, where fire trucks, police vehicles, and equipment lined up in long rows. Maps were spread across folding tables, dividing the area into three main zones: the northern forest bordering the highway, the central residential area, and the southern Raystown Lake region. Sheriff Haynes directed operations, ordering teams to sweep clockwise, moving slowly, and staying in radio contact. The K-9 teams started in the thin woods. Dogs were given the cloth doll to scent before fanning out. Sirens sounded at regular intervals, mixed with shouts and barking, echoing through the morning mist. Locals brought flashlights, shovels, and water jugs, walking single file along trails. At Raystown Lake, divers prepped metal detectors and magnetic scanners to search the lake bed. A state helicopter circled overhead with an infrared camera, scanning dense forest for any unusual heat signatures. By noon, the command center received the first report. In the northern Maple Woods, a small pink object was found caught in bushes, a piece of fabric similar to a child's hair ribbon. It was bagged, sealed, and sent to the lab for analysis. Later in the afternoon, a search team in the residential area found a child's pencil drawing of a house and a cat, crudely sketched. Police collected it but weren't sure it belonged to Mia. Though every small clue was carefully logged, Haynes knew they were still just fragments in an overwhelmingly large area. That first night, teams worked in shifts under patrol car floodlights, illuminating the forest edge. Temperatures dropped, thick fog reduced visibility, but the search continued. On the second day, the search radius expanded another 4 square miles, now including an abandoned factory to the east and a scrapyard near the railroad tracks. A K-9 unit found a child's white shoe caked in mud by a stream, owner unknown. It was collected along with footprints nearby. Still no blood, hair, or additional fibers. Haynes set up relief tents with food and water. Volunteers from neighboring towns joined, everyone silent and focused. From the helicopter, the pilot reported no human movement within a 1-mile radius of the forest edge. In the following days, exhaustion set in. Haynes stayed at command, constantly reviewing maps and marking checked locations. He ordered the lake dragged again, this time with small boats and sonar. The water was cold. Divers worked for hours with no results. On the third day, rain began, turning everything to mud and making movement difficult while destroying older traces. Volunteers dwindled. Only police, firefighters, and K-9 units remained. The final daily report listed 48 suspicious locations checked and 12 pieces of evidence collected, but nothing definitively pointed to the little girl's location or condition. Haynes met briefly with team leaders and decided to narrow the search to 3 core areas: the forest edge, the western creek, and the main road out of town. Some tents were taken down. The force was streamlined to continue one more day. Though no one said it, everyone felt hope fading by the hour. When the third night fell, police lights reflected off wet trees, and the temporary command post grew quiet. A preliminary report was filed, meticulously detailing the 3-day effort. Large-scale search conducted, no viable traces located. Evidence samples pending lab results. Haynes sat staring at the map covered in red dots, each one a failed effort. He closed his notebook, the same unanswerable question repeating in his mind: where had the 5-year-old girl gone on that peaceful morning? News of the disappearance spread across Pennsylvania just days after the search teams temporarily halted expansion. At first, local newspapers ran only a small column about 5-year-old girl missing in Mill Creek. But once images of the red bicycle and the rag doll were broadcast on state television channels, the case became something no one could ignore. Reporters from Pittsburgh, Harrisburg, and even Philadelphia poured into the town, bringing cameras, microphones, and endless questions. Mill Creek, a place that had barely appeared on any news map before, suddenly became the center of media attention. Every day, dozens of articles appeared, filled with photos of Margaret Thompson, the desperate mother, and Henry Collins, the mechanic who had once helped her family. The articles portrayed her as a fragile, somewhat careless woman who let her daughter ride her bike to school alone. Collins was depicted as a solitary, reclusive man with strange eyes. More than a few papers ran sensational headlines hinting at a suspicious relationship between the two, even though police had released no conclusions. Meanwhile, the townspeople began to split. One group believed Collins was the perpetrator. The other thought Margaret was hiding something. Every morning, dozens of people gathered outside the Thompson home, leaving flowers, dolls, or notes with prayers, but mixed in with the sympathy were harsh whispers. Some local radio stations opened special call-in segments, letting listeners phone in their theories, which only amplified unchecked speculation. On television, the evening news repeatedly showed Margaret sitting on her porch with empty eyes, and Collins leaving the police station with a cold expression. Those two contrasting images were edited together and replayed dozens of times, burning themselves into viewers' minds. Public pressure quickly turned into pressure on the investigators. The Huntingdon County Sheriff's Office received hundreds of calls a day, most of them unverified tips or threats. Some residents formed their own search parties, calling themselves Mill Creek Guardians, roaming the woods and riverbanks, and interfering with official operations. Haynes had to assign officers to patrol and keep them out of sealed areas. Inside the department, junior officers were growing exhausted. Many felt the case had spiraled beyond control. Haynes tried to stay calm, holding brief press conferences where he only confirmed that the investigation was ongoing and no one had been charged. But the press spun his cautious words in every direction, turning careful statements into attention-grabbing headlines. A photo of Haynes looking tense as he left a meeting ran on the front page of the Pennsylvania Herald under the banner, "Police still have nothing after 1 week." Even state officials started getting involved. The governor's office demanded a detailed progress report within 48 hours and an assessment of whether Mill Creek needed special state assistance. A team of coordinators arrived from Harrisburg, reviewed files, and interviewed Haynes directly. Their presence made the already heavy atmosphere inside the station almost suffocating. Haynes spent nearly an entire day walking them through every step taken, every area searched, and the list of everyone involved. The summary report was sent immediately that night and read, primary suspect Henry Collins, 28. Mechanic. Vehicle matches witness description. Victim, Mia Thompson, 5 years old, missing under unknown circumstances. Investigation ongoing, no conclusions yet. Instead of calming the public, that report only drew more media attention. Starting the next morning, fresh waves of reporters arrived. Television vans parked right in front of Town Hall, their antennas rising like flagpoles, and the once peaceful scene of Mill Creek turned into a stage where every eye was fixed on an unsolved crime. 3 days after the progress report was sent to the state, an unmarked envelope was delivered to the Mill Creek police station. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper, handwritten in blue ink, with a short message. "The little girl is safe now. Stop looking." There was no further explanation or signature. Sheriff Haynes examined it closely. The handwriting was even slightly slanted, with no signs of shaking or haste. The paper was ordinary, no watermark, no stains, folded neatly, as if by someone used to office work. He immediately sent it to the state handwriting lab for comparison, but nothing in local records matched. Tracing the sender hit a dead end. Haynes filed the letter under unverified information and continued focusing on the suspect vehicle. Around the same time, police received a statement from a man named Walter Dean, a worker at the old toll booth west of Mill Creek. He said that on the morning of the incident, between 8 and 9 o'clock, he saw a green pickup truck cross the wooden bridge toward Highway 322. The truck had no load, was moving slowly, and looked old, exactly matching Mrs. Fielding's description. Walter remembered the license plate only because the paint was peeling, but he couldn't read the full sequence, just that it started with a 7. The information was logged, and Haynes had officers check every registered vehicle in the area with similar characteristics. But aside from Henry Vaughan Collins's truck, nothing matched perfectly. While waiting for the letter analysis, the team returned to Mia's preschool to canvass again. One teacher said several early arriving children had mentioned that Mia was talking to a strange man near the fence. When questioned further, 3 kids all confirmed it, though their descriptions varied. One said the man wore a brown jacket, another remembered green, another said he had a baseball cap. None of them thought anything was wrong because the bell rang a few minutes later. Haynes had them draw diagrams marking where they saw Mia. The location was right at the intersection of the main road and the turnoff to the small market, the same route the green truck often took. When investigators returned to the spot, rain and foot traffic had wiped the area clean. No footprints or useful evidence remained. Vehicle data also yielded nothing new. Most 1956 Ford pickups in the region had been re-registered, sold, or stripped for parts. The lab's summary to Haynes stated clearly, insufficient data to determine origin of anonymous letter or identity of truck driver. He read it, folded it, and set it on the desk with dozens of other statements. Every new lead contradicted what they already knew. One witness said the truck turned west, another swore it went straight toward the lake. Some described a tall, thin man, others said average height. The letter claimed the girl is safe, yet offered no proof, and with each passing day the chances of finding the child alive grew slimmer. Haynes ordered a re-examination of every road connecting Mill Creek to neighboring towns and created a map of vehicle movements that fateful morning. Every route was marked with red arrows pointing out of town, but no physical evidence matched the tire tread from the scene. Tire tracks, soil samples, and engine oil all came back inconclusive. When night fell, only the yellow glow of the desk lamp remained in the station. Haynes sat alone, staring at the short message he had reread for hours. No signature, no address, nothing but ambiguity that forced him to ask if she really was safe. Why didn't the sender say where she was or make any demands? In his end-of-day report he wrote, "Source unverified, further verification required. No new leads on victim location or suspect vehicle." In the silent room, the wall clock struck 10, and the Mill Creek disappearance slipped into yet another cycle of contradictory clues and absolute silence. Heavy rain that lasted for days turned the area around the scene into thick mud, erasing whatever traces remained. When the forensics team returned for more samples, most of the ground where the bicycle had been found was washed away, leaving only patches of dark soil mixed with rotting leaves. The tire tracks Haynes had photographed with the old camera were no longer visible to the naked eye. The initial film rolls had been sent to the Huntington Photo Lab, but due to a technical error, some images were overexposed, losing critical details along the edges, precisely where the tire marks might have been clearest. Haynes received the ruined photos, and knew accurate analysis was now nearly impossible. Meanwhile, evidence collected at the scene, fabric scraps, dirt from the tires, threads from the doll, was stored in ordinary plastic bags with no cold storage or specialized equipment. After 2 weeks, many samples showed mold, rendering them useless for testing. Haynes sent a few to the state lab, but they replied that they lacked DNA technology or sophisticated fingerprint systems for fabric or soil. Forensic science at the time was still primitive. Recovering usable fingerprints outdoors was almost impossible. The report was brief. No viable identification results. That meant every effort to determine who had touched the bicycle or doll was pointless. Procedurally, the case file was updated daily, but in reality, there was no new data to process. Witnesses provided nothing further of value. The suspect truck remained unidentified, and the anonymous letter was untraceable. Haynes tried to keep his team's spirits up, but frustration was spreading through the office. Younger officers began questioning the initial direction, suggesting the child might have simply gotten lost and died elsewhere, and the truck was coincidental. Some residents, tired of the police presence, just wanted everything over so the town could return to normal. They asked for the barriers around the scene to be removed, saying the stalled investigation was disrupting their lives. Haynes resisted, but under pressure from county officials, he had to reduce the protected area, keeping only the spot where the bicycle was found. In the days that followed, rain continued, wiping away the last traces. When the weather finally cleared, fresh mud covered everything. It was impossible to distinguish old tire marks from those left by residents and searchers. A sense of defeat settled over the team. The first comprehensive report, sent to the state, openly listed the problems. Scene photos technically inadequate. Evidence degraded by weather, no fingerprint or DNA data recovered. Haynes read it aloud in a short meeting, then fell silent when no one spoke. Deep down he knew the case was slipping out of his grasp. Public opinion shifted to accusations of police incompetence. Newspapers ran articles criticizing the delays and lack of expertise of the local force. A photo of the bicycle half buried in mud appeared on the front page of the Pittsburgh Gazette with the caption, "The Last Trace of the Mill Creek Girl." The station received more anonymous calls, some claiming to know where the body was buried, but every lead turned out false or cruel hoaxes. Haynes was exhausted from chasing useless tips. Each evening he sat in his office, staring at the blurry photos, trying to reconstruct the scene in his mind. Everything was against him: time, weather, and the fragility of evidence. At the end of the month, the final report sent to the state concluded briefly: victim location, cause of disappearance, and specific suspect remain undetermined. Case temporarily archived under unsolved missing child. The red stamp came down, the papers were filed in the metal cabinet, and the lights in the office went out, marking the end of a phase. Outside, Mill Creek returned to its quiet rhythm, but no one on the investigation team could forget the hollow feeling left by 3 weeks of fruitless searching. Haynes stepped out of the station, looked down the rain-wet road that led into the woods where it all began, then turned away, carrying the weight of an unsolved case. In the years after Mia Thompson's file was placed in the unsolved missing child category, Mill Creek slowly sank back into its old routine. But for the Thompson family, time did nothing to ease the emptiness. Margaret continued to send handwritten letters every year to the Huntington County Sheriff's Office and even to the state police, containing only one request: reopen the case. Each letter was neatly written and ended with the same line: "Please find my little girl, even if only the truth." The replies were always form letters, stating no new information to warrant review, and the letters were added to the old file. Her husband Thomas grew quieter, his health declining from overwork and emotional strain. Their small house on Pine Street became desolate, no more piano music or children's laughter. By the early 1960s, after years of pitying looks from neighbors, they sold the house and moved to live with relatives in Harrisburg. Mia's disappearance then only occasionally appeared in small newspaper columns, a sad memory from central Pennsylvania. On the other side of the state, Henry Collins, the former primary suspect, left Mill Creek just 1 year after the investigation ended. He found work at a garage in Youngstown, Ohio, where demand for auto repairs was high due to expanding interstate highways. His boss described him as quiet, hard-working, not very social, and often staying late at the shop. He rented a small room near the train station, lived alone, and had no family or close friends. Over the years, almost no one in Mill Creek remembered him, except a few old-timers in law enforcement. His file remained on a passive watch list, but with no criminal activity he was never contacted. In April 1972, a short notice appeared in an Ohio local paper, "Man killed in crash on Route 422. Youngstown police confirmed the victim was Henry Collins, 43, mechanic, who died when his car lost control, hit a guardrail, and caught fire. The coroner ruled brake failure with no evidence of intent. While clearing the wreckage, rescue workers found a small metal box, scorched on the outside, but intact inside. When opened, it contained an old brown notebook with charred corners. An officer logged it as personal property. The notebook was taken to the station and stored with the accident file. Most pages were filled with scribbled engine repair formulas and parts lists, but scattered among them were a few short lines in pencil. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I just took the little girl away." No name, no date. The words were unclear, leaving the true meaning ambiguous. The officer filed it, but found no link to any crime, so the notebook was sealed and placed in the Mahoning County evidence locker. No one in Youngstown knew about the Mill Creek disappearance 15 years earlier, so no one thought to cross-reference. When the final accident report was completed, the recovered items section simply read, 01 technical notebook, 01 metal lighter, 01 leather wallet, no documents related to criminal activity. The file was closed quietly. In Pennsylvania, Margaret learned of Henry Collins's death months later through an old acquaintance who saw the notice. She brought the small newspaper clipping to the Mill Creek station and asked whether he had ever revealed anything about her daughter. Haynes, retired by then, could only say the case was past the statute for active investigation, and there was no interstate mechanism for such matters. He promised to note the information in case new evidence emerges, but nothing ever did. In the following years, both Mill Creek and the county authorities all but forgot the case. File number 57, MC004, sat deep in a metal cabinet, passed through generations of officers without ever being reopened. And Henry Collins' notebook, the only item containing those vague words, lay forgotten among hundreds of minor case artifacts in an Ohio storage room, silent for decades. In the 1980s, the state of Pennsylvania began building a new storage system for unsolved cases called the Cold Case Repository. Thousands of old files were gathered from counties, reclassified, digitized, and entered into a central database in Harrisburg. Among them was a thin folder coded 57 MC004, the 1957 disappearance of Mia Thompson. The blurry photographs, a few witness statements, and the final report labeled Unsolved Missing Child were placed in a new cover, and no one paid much attention to it. Nearly 20 years later, in 1998, a young officer named Mark Peltier, newly transferred to the Huntingdon County Investigation Unit, was assigned to review unresolved missing persons cases. He worked in a small room filled with old metal filing cabinets that smelled of damp paper and rust. Out of dozens of files, the Mia Thompson case caught his eye, perhaps because of the black and white photo of the little girl, with a gentle smile, and the note, 5-year-old victim, disappeared near Mill Creek. Peltier read the entire file, turning each page carefully and taking detailed notes. When he reached the crime scene description, he noticed the original report mentioned tire tracks found in the damp soil, medium width, herringbone tread pattern, rear tire worn unevenly. Cross-referencing registered vehicles in the area from 1957, Peltier discovered the tread almost perfectly matched the tires used on 1956 Ford F-100 pickups, the exact model once owned by Henry Collins. He double-checked the copy of Collins's vehicle registration and confirmed the chassis number matched the described tire type. The discovery excited him. It was the first solid match in over 40 years. He immediately submitted a report to his superiors, requesting the case be reopened to re-examine any remaining physical evidence. However, when he visited the evidence locker, the custodian informed him that all physical items from the Mill Creek case had been destroyed in a 1979 warehouse cleanout due to deterioration and mold. No fabric, soil samples, or tire impressions remained. The crime scene photographs existed only as faded prints, too low quality for digital enhancement. Peltier tried to obtain more information from Ohio, where Henry Collins had died in 1972, but the interstate record system at the time did not allow cross-state access. His request for assistance was returned with the note, "No verified direct connection between the incident and the victim." All he had was a technical match between a tire type and a 40-year-old witness statement. In his final report to the State Cold Case Coordination Office, Peltier wrote, "Suspected tire tracks match the vehicle type owned by the individual previously identified as the primary suspect. However, due to lack of physical evidence, scientific verification is not possible. Recommend the file remain under passive monitoring." After the report was approved, the Mia Thompson file was returned to storage and stamped in red ink, inactive. For Peltier, the case became a quiet obsession. He would occasionally pull out the old photograph and wonder what had happened to the little girl. But in the justice system of that era, there was no path forward, no DNA, no evidence, no new witnesses, just a chain of papers slowly eaten away by time. In the end, File 57MC004 was pushed deep into a metal cabinet alongside hundreds of other 1950s cases. On the cover, the handwritten words "Mill Creek, missing girl" faded over the years, just like the memory of a disappearance that had once made an entire town hold its breath during a long-ago summer. In early 2010, while researching a series called Forgotten Cases for the Pennsylvania Tribune, investigative reporter Eleanor Reed stumbled upon File 57MC004 in the State Department of Justice archives in Harrisburg. She had been granted access to the cold case repository to find material for an article about unsolved disappearances from the previous century. Among hundreds of dusty folders, a thin one titled "Mill Creek, Missing Girl, 1957, caught her attention. Inside were yellowed pages, blurry crime scene photos, a few witness statements, and investigation reports signed by Sheriff Robert Haynes. On top was a black and white photograph of a 5-year-old girl with bright eyes and hair tied with a pink ribbon. Reed lingered over that photo for a long time, feeling an inexplicable pull. She began copying documents, photographing old newspaper clippings from 1957 with screaming headlines like "Little Girl Vanishes from Mill Creek." She noted every detail: location, weather, witnesses, and the name of the suspect, 28-year-old mechanic Henry Collins. After weeks of research, Reed decided to track down anyone still alive who had been connected to the case. Records showed that Robert Haynes, the original lead investigator, had retired and was living in the Lancaster suburbs. She sent a letter first, explaining that she simply wanted to understand the investigation process and was not trying to reopen old wounds. A week later, Haynes called back. His voice was raspy but steady as he asked why she cared about a case buried for over half a century. Reed replied that sometimes a story everyone thinks is closed can still teach us something about justice. Their first meeting took place at a small coffee shop near his home. Haynes brought an old leather satchel containing original photographs and his personal 1957 notebook. He said the disappearance had always been the crack in his career, an unsolved case he could never forget. Reed listened, recorded, and learned details never made public. An anonymous letter claiming the little girl is safe now, or crime scene photos ruined during development. Reed returned to Harrisburg, feeling she had touched something still lingering in legal history. She wrote a proposal to her editor, requesting funding for an independent investigation parallel to the state cold case unit. In the plan, she argued that modern forensic technology could re-examine evidence previously considered useless, photographs, documents, or even residual DNA in stored samples. A week later, the editor approved the project. Reed went back to the archives and asked to see all supplemental records for Case 57 MC004. She discovered an entry reading "Evidence Destroyed, 1979." But below it a handwritten note from an archivist, "Original photos and negatives temporarily transferred to Harrisburg in 1982. That faint line led her to request access to the state's old film vault. Among dozens of canisters, she found one damaged reel labeled Mill Creek, June 1957. The images were foggy, and many frames overexposed, but a few in the middle clearly showed the child's bicycle and faint tire tracks in the dirt. Reed digitized the entire reel and contacted the cold case unit's imaging lab for digital restoration. She also compiled original news articles and witness statements into a 40-page summary and sent it to the coordination unit. In her collaboration proposal, she wrote, "Today's image analysis and DNA comparison technology can reopen cases previously thought impossible." Mill Creek is a perfect example of how old data can gain new value. She presented the material in person to the cold case team leader, Lieutenant David Hunt, who had solved multiple cases using genetic genealogy. Hunt agreed to review it, saying that if any original evidence still existed, even something tiny, DNA, or imaging data, might still be recoverable. The meeting ended with a brief handshake, marking the start of a long re-examination process, a journey Eleanor Reed could not yet imagine would change both her view of journalism and her understanding of time's power to bring truth back into the light. A few weeks after the meeting with Lieutenant Hunt, the plan to resurvey Mill Creek was approved. A cold case task force, consisting of forensic technicians, crime scene analysts, and 2 investigators, was sent to the town. Eleanor Reed was present as an authorized press observer. Mill Creek in 2010 looked nothing like the pictures in the old files. The dirt road where the bicycle had been found in 1957 was now paved, the rows of maple trees had grown old, and the thin forest to the north had shrunk due to residential development. Still, the hand-drawn map from Sheriff Haynes helped the team locate the approximate original scene. On the first day, they set up a temporary command post on a nearby clearing, bringing ground-penetrating radar, magnetometers, and geological GPS systems. The goal was to scan everything within 2 meters of the surface around the suspected area for signs of buried objects. The morning was cold and damp, fog covering the ground, making it feel as if time had folded in on itself. Technicians marked the area into 3-meter grid squares. Each square was numbered, and radar data was recorded. The screens gradually showed reflection waves, mostly tree roots, rocks, and scraps of metal. However, about 15 meters west of the location noted in the original file, the radar displayed an unusual high-density anomaly, small in size, at roughly 30 centimeters deep. The team halted, marked the spot, and began digging by hand to avoid damaging anything. After about an hour, they uncovered a small piece of metal and a hard, round object resembling a pebble but paler in color. When cleaned with specialized solution, it turned out to be a piece of human fingernail, about half a centimeter long, with a natural break along one edge. Under magnification, the surface showed fine scratches that could not be identified visually. The item was photographed, measured, sealed in a cold storage evidence bag, and labeled MC57R11. They also collected surrounding soil samples for moisture and mineral testing, factors that could help date the nail if it truly originated from the time of the crime. While the forensic team continued scanning other areas, Eleanor Reed documented every step and watched them work together. She realized this was the first time in over half a century that anyone had put a shovel into that ground in search of truth. By late afternoon, the radar survey was complete and showed no other significant objects. Sample MC57R11 was transported that night to the Central State Forensic Lab in a temperature-controlled vehicle. Hunt signed the chain of custody form and noted new evidence, possible DNA source, recovered from area corresponding to 1957 original scene, requires genetic sequencing. In the preliminary report, the cold case team also noted that although the terrain had changed significantly and the topsoil disturbed by construction over the years, the layer where the fingernail was found remained naturally intact, proving it was not recent contamination. The next day, the team left Mill Creek with radar data, geological maps, and full photographic documentation. In the vehicle, Reed silently watched the maple trees recede through the window as gusts of wind kicked up thin layers of dust. She remembered something Haynes had said during their interview. "If we'd had DNA back then, that little girl might have come home." Now that very technology was opening a new crack of light into a case everyone thought had gone cold forever. As the convoy left town, the late afternoon sun glinted off the old "Welcome to Mill Creek" sign. In a cooler in the back, the tiny sample MC57R11, a fingernail fragment, lay quietly in its vial, waiting for analysis at the state lab, where the decoding process would begin. The Pennsylvania State Forensic Laboratory received sample MC57R11 the next morning. Under an electron microscope, technicians confirmed the keratin structure was still intact, allowing DNA extraction despite the sample being over 50 years old. The fingernail was processed using ancient DNA protocols and repair enzymes to restore damaged strands. 3 days later, the lab sent Lieutenant Hunt a preliminary report. Genetic sequence obtained is viable for identification comparison. The DNA profile was entered into the state's missing persons anthropology database, which still contained the old Thompson family reference samples submitted in 1970 when Margaret Thompson provided her own hair and brush on FBI advice. When the system ran the match, it returned a 99.94% maternal relative match with Margaret Thompson's sample, effectively confirming mother and daughter relationship. The entire lab fell silent for a few seconds before the director signed the official verification. Sample MC57R11 originates from an individual in direct maternal lineage with missing person Mia Thompson. The report was forwarded to the cold case office and simultaneously uploaded to the National Genealogy Database, CODIS Plus, a new system that allowed cross-referencing with commercial civilian DNA banks. The goal was to locate distant relatives living in other states. The process took weeks as billions of genetic markers were compared. Meanwhile, Eleanor Reed followed every update, carefully documenting for the article she planned to publish once the investigation concluded. In the fourth week, an unexpected hit appeared in the federal gene match system, a civilian profile belonging to a woman named Mary Colson, residing in Jacksonville, Florida, matched sample MC57R11 at 99.98%, confirming a direct parent-child relationship, meaning she was very likely the missing victim herself. Records showed Mary Colson was born in 1957 in Florida and legally adopted in 1960 by a local family with no information about her biological parents. The match prompted Lieutenant Hunt to immediately contact the FBI Cold Case Unit, as the case now exceeded state jurisdiction. The next day, a federal cooperation agreement was signed, launching a joint investigation between the Pennsylvania State Police and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. FBI agents from Washington headquarters arrived in Harrisburg to review the verification process. A new saliva sample from Mary Colson was collected and sent to the central lab at Quantico to rule out error. Results came back within 72 hours, perfect match with the original fingernail DNA. The report stated clearly, DNA belongs to an individual in mother-daughter relationship with Margaret Thompson. Probability of error 0.02%. At the same time, the FBI examined Mary Colson's background records and uncovered several irregularities. Her birth certificate was issued 2 years after the recorded birth date, listed Gainesville, Florida, as the birthplace, and was registered by a woman named Louise Harper, who had no genetic relation to her. Agents quickly requested original documents, but the Gainesville Civil Records Office reported the files lost in a 1979 warehouse fire. However, Federal Adoption and Immigration Archives still held electronic copies showing Mary Colson's paperwork had passed through 2 families before settling in Jacksonville. The complicated paper trail convinced investigators that she could indeed be Mia Thompson, the child who vanished in 1957 but was raised under a different identity. Once the second DNA confirmation was received, the FBI officially announced the Mill Creek case reopened at the federal level under the new designation. The notification, sent to all relevant agencies, stated, "Physical evidence recovered from the 1957 scene contains DNA matching a living individual. Full federal coordination required for identity verification and origin tracing." Lieutenant Hunt convened a meeting with the investigation team and forensic representatives to plan next steps. Eleanor Reed attended and was allowed to take notes on non-classified information. During the meeting, experts presented genetic diagrams illustrating the relationships among Margaret, the fingernail sample, and Mary Colson, confirming random coincidence was impossible. A 48-page evidence summary was compiled and sent to the Department of Justice and FBI. The case was placed on the cold case priority list, reserved for files with new biological evidence surfacing after more than 3 decades. When media outlets began receiving leaks that a 1957 missing child case had been revived through DNA, the name Mill Creek reappeared on the map. However, all details remained tightly sealed. Additional confirmation samples were sent simultaneously to independent labs in New York and Maryland. Both returned identical results confirming the Thompson lineage match. Within the FBI, the development was regarded as a breakthrough of historic significance for cold case work. The August 2011 consolidated report stated, "After more than 50 years, genetic technology has enabled the re-identification of missing person Mia Thompson through a minute surviving biological sample. The case is officially reactivated and under federal investigation." When that document was signed, the tiny fingernail fragment MC57R11, once a seemingly meaningless piece of evidence, became the starting point for a journey to restore the identity of a human being the world had long believed was lost forever. After the DNA results were confirmed and the Mill Creek case was officially reopened, the federal investigation team shifted focus to re-examining all data related to Henry Collins, the former prime suspect in the 1957 disappearance. The FBI, working with the Ohio State Police, began searching for remaining records and belongings of Collins, who had died in an accident in 1972. In Youngstown, they located the small house he had rented, which still stood and was now owned by another family. After completing the legal procedures, the technical team conducted a search. The house, built in the 1940s, had a narrow basement with dusty walls, but many of Collins's old possessions remained, forgotten since his death. In an old wooden trunk pushed against the wall, they discovered a scorched metal box, apparently an item the Ohio police had once seized and later returned to the landlord as not criminally relevant. Inside the box were several photographs, some automotive technical documents, and a brown-covered notebook. One photo stood out, a blonde girl about 1 to 2 years old, wearing a white dress, standing on a beach with the distinctive palm trees of the Miami area. On the back, in slanted handwriting and faded blue ink, were the words, "My little one is safe." The ink had faded, but was still legible. Analysis showed the photo was taken on Kodachrome film, common around 1958, just 1 year after Mia Thompson vanished. The FBI sent the image to the Criminal Image Analysis Center for facial comparison with a 1957 photo of Mia. The facial recognition match came back at 87%, a figure high enough to be considered a positive identification given the technology and age of the images. In addition to the photo, the team found an old gas receipt made out to H. Collins from a service station in Jacksonville, Florida, dated May 1958. This confirmed Collins was in Florida at the exact time the child in the photo was photographed. To strengthen the evidence, the FBI tracked down people in Youngstown who had known Collins. An elderly former neighbor, Frank Beasley, recalled during an interview that Collins had once said he had to leave Pennsylvania because of personal matters and that he took a little kid with him to protect her from trouble. When pressed for details, Beasley said Collins was clearly very attached to the child and constantly talked about the little girl with the blonde hair and her doll. Beasley's statement matched the original description of Mia Thompson in the case file almost perfectly. The FBI also traced Collins's employment records and discovered he had quit his job at a Pennsylvania garage in late June 1957, only 2 weeks after Mia disappeared. His tax return for that year showed no steady employment for many months afterward, with his next job in Ohio not starting until March 1958. That unexplained 8-month gap had never been addressed in any prior report. By cross-referencing travel records, gas receipts, and auto parts invoices, investigators were able to reconstruct a plausible route from Mill Creek. Collins drove south on Highway 322 through West Virginia and down to northern Florida. The timeline aligned perfectly with the date of the Miami Beach photo. The brown notebook recovered from the metal box contained mostly scattered technical notes, but among the entries about engines and oil were a few personal lines. "Don't let them find her. The little girl needs to be forgotten. And I did this because she deserves a chance." Handwriting experts compared these entries to the anonymous 1957 letter sent to the Mill Creek police and found a high degree of similarity in slant and pressure. While not conclusive proof that Collins wrote the letter, the connection was now stronger than ever. The FBI's consolidated report concluded, photographic evidence, witness statements, and travel documentation place Henry Collins in the state of Florida during a time frame consistent with the abduction. All data support the hypothesis that Collins removed the child from the state after June 1957. When the report reached Harrisburg, Lieutenant Hunt added a note to the Mill Creek file. Collins' timeline verified. After more than half a century, the scattered pieces of Henry Collins's life were finally falling into place, and the image of the man with the green pickup truck from that year emerged clearly. No longer just a faded name in a file, but a critical link between a child's disappearance and a journey no one had ever fully understood. After evidence found in Ohio confirmed that Henry Collins had been in Florida with a little girl in 1958, the FBI shifted its primary focus to the woman named Mary Colson, whose DNA showed a near-perfect match to the Thompson family line. The federal team traveled to Jacksonville, where Mary lived and worked as an elementary school teacher. They began by examining her birth certificate at the Florida Office of Vital Statistics. The document stated that Mary Colson was born May 23, 1957, in Gainesville, mother Louise Harper, father unknown. However, hospital records from the same date showed no birth under that name. Moreover, the certificate had been filed in 1960, 3 years after the stated birth date, and was submitted by Louise Harper herself, with no state guardianship verification. This discrepancy was considered highly irregular, since in the 1950s births were required to be registered within 30 days. When the FBI requested signature and ID verification, they discovered Louise Harper had briefly worked at a garage in Mill Creek in 1957 and was a distant relative of Henry Collins. This raised the strong possibility that Collins and Harper had taken the child out of Pennsylvania together. To be certain, investigators obtained court permission for an independent DNA sample from Mary Colson. A saliva swab was sent to the FBI's central lab in Quantico, and a blood sample was sent to the Civilian Gene Center in New York. Results from both facilities were identical. Mary's DNA matched Margaret Thompson's maternal sample at 99.98%, and the fingernail evidence from the Mill Creek scene at 100%. The scientific report concluded, there is no possibility of error. Mary Coulson and Mia Thompson are the same person. Once the results were confirmed, the FBI expanded the investigation into Mary's adoption records. Documents at the Duval County Family Court showed Mary was legally adopted in August 1960 by Mr. and Mrs. Coulson, a childless couple. The paperwork was complete and properly stamped. However, the temporary guardian listed before finalization was Louise Harper. Harper then disappeared from all records. The file noted that the adoption was approved based on the original Gainesville birth certificate, the very document Harper had submitted, which was fraudulent. At that time, Florida had no cross-state or federal record-checking system, so the adoption was considered lawful. In later statements, the Coulsons said they received the child through a middle-aged woman who told them the parents had died in an accident up north. This statement convinced investigators that Harper had helped Collins create a new identity for the child and then vanished once the handover was complete. When the FBI reviewed Collins's travel records, they found he left Florida just 2 months after Mary's adoption, returned to Ohio, and began working at the Youngstown garage. Every detail fit perfectly with the reconstructed chain of events. A 60-plus page investigative summary was sent to the Department of Justice, confirming the route Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Florida, spanning June 1957 to August 1960. During those 3 years, Collins and Harper likely lived with the child in various locations before placing her with the Coulson family. Once verification was complete, the FBI held an internal meeting in Harrisburg, attended by representatives from Florida, the forensics lab, and the cold case unit. The master case report was updated. Missing person Mia Thompson has been located alive under the identity Mary Coulson. Adoption legal, but based on falsified documents. No evidence of violence or harm during transport. After the meeting, Lieutenant Hunt and the FBI agreed on the next step. Prepare for a meeting between Mary and her biological mother, Margaret Thompson, now over 80, and living in a Harrisburg nursing home. Before any direct contact, investigators needed to ensure Mary had sufficient time and support to process the truth about her identity, as the shock could cause severe psychological trauma if mishandled. A team of FBI psychological counselors was dispatched to Florida to meet with her, walking her step by step through the investigation and all DNA results. At first, Mary was stunned and refused to believe she had been the victim of a kidnapping, but when shown restored photos of a young Margaret and her 1956 birthday picture recovered from archives, she broke down in tears and admitted that in her faint childhood memories, she had always seen a young woman sitting at a piano. That moment led her to cooperate fully, sign the identity confirmation documents, and allow the FBI to collect additional data to finalize the legal file. Once she was more emotionally stable, the first in-depth sessions with the FBI's psychological team began. It was during these sessions that Mary, now confirmed as Mia Thompson, started to unlock fragmented memories she had carried in her subconscious for over half a century. Small pieces like sunlight filtering through maple leaves or the sound of metal rolling on the ground. In those dreams, she remembered a woman's voice calling her name, then a rough hand lifting her up and placing her in the back seat of a pickup truck that smelled of gasoline and motor oil. When shown reconstructed photos of the 1957 Mill Creek scene, Mia immediately recognized the moss-green Ford truck and the dirt road winding through the maple forest, saying, "This is the place I see in my dreams." The specialists used controlled memory retrieval techniques, helping her recall through sensations rather than clear images. She described the man who took her as tall, dark-haired, with a raspy voice, not violent, but insistent, "We have to go now, your mommy won't be sad anymore." She remembered crying and asking for her doll, and the man promising to buy her a new one. After that, the memories blurred, leaving only the sensation of a very long drive and stopping one evening somewhere with the ocean and the smell of salt. When shown the 1958 Miami Beach photo of the blonde toddler, Mia was silent for a long time before saying, "I know this picture. I remember those white sandals." She described the small house where she lived then, with the woman she called Aunt Louise, who brushed her hair, sang low lullabies, and always told her never to talk about her mother. The counselors documented everything, then cross-referenced it with the original case file. Collins's departure from Pennsylvania, the route through West Virginia and into Florida, and the description of the accompanying woman all matched Louise Harper, Collins's relative. Even the details of motor oil smell and metal sounds aligned with Detective Haynes's original suspicion that the perpetrator was a mechanic. When asked about her time with the Colson family, Mia said memories before age 3 were very hazy, but she had always felt she didn't completely belong. She had once asked her adoptive parents why there were no baby pictures of her, and they said the documents were lost in a fire. The FBI psychological report determined she exhibited signs of prolonged trauma, fragmented memories, wariness of loud engines, and unease around metallic clanging. Evaluation concluded these reactions were genuine after effects of forced relocation at a very young age. When her account was compared to the 1957 file, the team noted a high degree of correspondence, the forest location, truck description, the man's build, and the presence of an accompanying woman all matched. The final analysis stated that Mia's memories, though fragmented, provided a descriptive sequence consistent with the Collins-Harper journey reconstructed from legal documents. Over multiple sessions, Mia began recalling additional small details, the smell of wood varnish, distant piano music, light coming through a window frame, fragments that together formed a hazy but coherent picture. The psychological team's final report to the FBI concluded, patient exhibits classic characteristics of a child separated from family at an early developmental stage. Original memories are stored as sensory rather than visual data and can only be partially recovered. Prolonged trauma indicators confirm her history aligns with the 1957 disappearance case. When the final evaluation ended, Mia lowered her head and quietly said, "I think I've been carrying Mill Creek in my dreams my whole life without knowing it was home." That sentence became a milestone for the investigation team because it showed she was ready to move forward and face her past directly. Immediately afterward, the FBI and the cold case unit began logistical planning for the next step, the reunion between Mia and her birth mother, who had waited more than half a century. The meeting was scheduled for early June 2012 at a small conference center on the grounds of the Pennsylvania State Police headquarters in Harrisburg. That location was chosen after multiple meetings among the FBI, the cold case unit, and state authorities to ensure privacy while still providing adequate medical and security conditions. Margaret Thompson, then 82 years old, was brought from the Mill Creek Home Nursing Facility. She was in a wheelchair, frail but still carrying the elegant bearing of someone who had once taught piano. In her hand, she clutched an old photograph of Mia, taken in 1956, its edges worn smooth. The meeting room was arranged simply, a long table, 2 chairs facing each other, and around them investigators, a psychologist, and FBI representatives. When the vehicle carrying Mia, now Mary Colson, pulled up in front of the building, everyone stood still. She walked in, calm in appearance, but with tears in her eyes. She wore a light gray sweater and carried the letter she had written to her birth mother right after learning the truth. The encounter began in silence. There were no opening remarks, no reporters, just people who had traveled half a century to reach this moment. Margaret looked up when she heard the door open, her gaze settling on the face of the woman standing before her. That instant stretched like a pause in time. Trembling, she raised her hand and softly called, "Mia." No one translated, no one prompted, but both understood. Mia stepped closer, knelt beside the wheelchair, and placed her hand on her mother's thin one. Their hands clasped tightly, without a word. There was only breathing, quiet sobbing, and the sound of witnesses turning away to respect the private moment. The supervising doctor stepped forward to confirm the in-person identification procedure, projecting a DNA graphic onto the screen, 3 gene sequences perfectly overlaid. Margaret's sample, the crime scene sample, and Mia's, showing an absolute match. At that moment, Margaret looked up, gave a faint smile, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I knew you were still alive." No one could hold back tears. Lieutenant Hunt, the lead investigator on the case, signed the update to the case status report, "Found, alive." The document would be filed in the state's cold case repository with the note, "Missing person victim located alive after 55 years." After the legal confirmation, Mia read the short letter she had written. She said she blamed no one, only felt gratitude for being found, and for having the chance to call the woman in front of her mother. Margaret listened, tears streaming down her face, her lips moving as if trying to sing, but only faint sounds mixed with breath emerged. She whispered that the song you loved was Moon River, then closed her eyes and smiled. In the room, the atmosphere dissolved into quiet sobs. After a few minutes, the doctor suggested both rest. They were moved to a private room where an old piano, the same model Margaret had once taught on, had been borrowed from the nursing home by the investigators. When the two were alone, Mia placed her fingers on the keys and played a few notes. The music sounded faint but clear and round. Margaret opened her eyes, nodded slightly, and said very softly, "Now you're home." The reunion ended with the signing of the identity confirmation minutes in the presence of representatives from the State Department of Justice, the FBI, and 2 civilian witnesses. The final case summary stated clearly, victim Mia Thompson, born 1952, disappeared from Mill Creek on June 12, 1957. Confirmed alive under the identity Mary Colson in Florida. DNA results 100% match. In-person identification confirmed. Case status updated to found alive. After the signing ceremony, a small group took archival photos, not for the media, but to complete the historical file. In the photograph, Margaret holds her daughter's hand, eyes half closed, while behind them the investigators stand in a row, their faces showing a mix of exhaustion and fulfillment. Outside the building, a light rain fell over Pennsylvania. Everyone quietly departed, leaving only the mother and daughter sitting by the window, watching raindrops slide down the glass. The longest journey of their lives had closed on a quiet afternoon, where the truth had finally returned to its rightful place. Following the reunion and the official identity confirmation, the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Pennsylvania Department of Justice completed the comprehensive final report on the entire Mill Creek case after more than half a century. The document, over 100 pages long, reconstructed the full chain of events from June 1957 until the case was closed. The conclusion was signed by the FBI Director and the State Attorney General, stating clearly, Henry Collins, age 28, a mechanic in Mill Creek, was directly responsible for the kidnapping of child Mia Thompson, with assistance from Louise Harper, age 32, a relative of Collins, who had lived in Pennsylvania before moving to Florida. The report described Collins's motive as stemming not from criminal financial gain or violence, but from a misguided belief that he was protecting the child. While acquainted with the Thompson family, Collins had once witnessed Margaret scolding Mia and mistakenly believed the little girl was being cruelly treated. Excessive sympathy combined with personal isolation led him to believe he had to rescue her from that environment. Louise Harper, who was close to Collins, agreed to help plan the child's removal from Mill Creek, using a green Ford F-100 pickup truck to carry it out. The two waited until the morning of June 12, 1957, when Mia walked to school alone. Collins approached her, lied that her mother had asked him to drive her to school, then headed straight south on Highway 322. Data from gas receipts and witness statements reconfirmed the route, matching stops in West Virginia, Georgia, and Florida. Upon reaching Gainesville, Harper filed a falsified birth certificate, listing herself as the birth mother to legalize the child's new identity. 3 years later, as Collins prepared to leave Florida, Harper arranged to hand the child over to a childless couple in Jacksonville, the Colsons. The adoption was legally completed, but based on fraudulent documents in August 1960. Throughout that period, Collins and Harper lived under the radar, using old industrial area contacts in the South to conceal their whereabouts. The FBI report, listed 11 individuals identified as having indirect contact, most of whom were unaware of the child's true origin. They provided lodging, temporary jobs, and transportation for Collins, believing he was raising his own child or niece. The chain of events showed Collins always believed he was doing the right thing, even though his actions shattered a family and robbed a child of her identity for half a century. The investigative file also highlighted the failures of the federal administrative system at the time, when states operated independently with no cross-checking mechanism for birth records, making it easy for Harper to create false documentation. The psychological analysis section described Collins as impulsive but without evidence of severe mental disorder. He was driven by guilt over wartime losses and sought a redemptive purpose. Louise Harper was assessed as a lonely woman influenced by Collins, who also possessed administrative experience that helped him legalize necessary paperwork. After Mia was placed with the Coulson family, Collins left Florida, moved to Ohio, worked and lived reclusively until his death in an accident in 1972. Harper disappeared after 1961 and was later confirmed to have died in Texas in 1995 under an assumed name. Since both were deceased, criminal prosecution was impossible, but the FBI still completed the file for potential civil liability to formally close the investigation. The official report concluded the kidnapping motive arose from a mistaken belief that the child needed protection. There is no evidence of abuse or assault while the victim lived with Collins and Harper. However, the acts of kidnapping and falsifying birth records violated federal laws regarding interstate transport of a minor and identity fraud. At the end of the report, a brief note, both suspects deceased, case considered fully resolved, file status changed to closed, non-prosecutable. During the closing meeting, Lieutenant Hunt read aloud the final sentence from the investigative team's assessment. This is not a story of cold-blooded crime, but of the tragic consequences of misdirected kindness. When he signed the completed report, the final pages of the Mill Creek case were officially closed, ending more than half a century of searching for the truth, and delivering to history a complete, dry, yet weighty conclusion of justice restored, however late. After the FBI's comprehensive report was finalized, the document analysis team continued reviewing ancillary physical evidence in the Mill Creek file, including an anonymous letter sent to the police department in the summer of 1957 that read, "The little girl is safe now. Stop looking." The letter had once been dismissed as worthless, but now, with Louise Harper identified as Henry Collins's accomplice, the FBI decided to re-examine it. The Federal Handwriting Analysis Lab used spectral scanning and pen stroke recognition modeling to compare the writing on the letter with Harper's known signatures from the falsified Florida birth records and old administrative documents. Results showed a 97% match, particularly in the curved A and the distinctive slant of the letters. The report concluded with near certainty that Louise Harper was the author. This reinforced the theory that Collins and Harper, after settling in Florida, deliberately mailed the letter back to Pennsylvania to mislead investigators and convince police the child was alive and further searching was unnecessary. Investigators reconstructed the mailing timeline. The faint postmark on the envelope indicated it originated in the Jacksonville area in early August 1957, perfectly matching the period when Collins and Harper were believed to have reached the South. The letter's brief content contained no ransom demand or threat, revealing its sole purpose was to halt the investigation. During the evaluation meeting, the criminal psychologist assessed that Harper was likely influenced by Collins, believing she was protecting the child and helping her start a new life. Additional federal records from 1960 showed Harper still lived in Gainesville until late 1959, working part-time at a children's clothing store, then suddenly withdrew all her savings and left the state. Bank records noted the withdrawal on August 15, 1960, 1 week before the Coulsons finalized the legal adoption. From this, investigators concluded Harper had cared for Mia during the first roughly 2 years in Florida. then arranged the transfer to the Colson family and fled the state to avoid tracing. Every detail aligned with Mia's recollection of living with Aunt Louise in a small house near the sea, where there were lullabies and the smell of salt. Confirming Harper as the letter's author also explained why the 1957 investigation quickly stalled. The letter led Sheriff Haynes to believe the case might involve a family acquaintance rather than a criminal abduction, thereby reducing search pressure. In the supplemental report, the FBI stated clearly, the purpose of the anonymous letter has been determined as a deliberate act to misdirect investigating authorities and facilitate suspect Collins' safe departure from the state. Since Harper died in 1995, prosecution was impossible. Authorities simply completed legal procedure by resealing the evidence, filing it with the original case records, and adding the note, "Author confirmed. L. Harper." The two-page closing minutes ended with Lieutenant Hunt's remark, "The letter that once sent the entire investigation down the wrong path has now found its owner." Its purpose was not to conceal a crime, but to end the fear of two adults who thought they were saving a child. After stamping, the document was entered into the FBI's cold case archive, officially concluding the final processing of physical evidence in the Mill Creek case. From that point, the once mysterious anonymous letter became historical evidence, closing its role in a story that had lasted more than half a century. 6 months after the reunion, recorded as a landmark event in Pennsylvania judicial history, Margaret Thompson passed away in her sleep at the Mill Creek Home Nursing Facility at the age of 83. In the small notebook she left behind, the final line read, "My little girl came home, and now I can rest in peace." Her funeral was held simply at the town cemetery, attended by those who had worked the case, including Lieutenant Hunt, Eleanor Reed, and members of the cold case team. Mia stood silently beside the headstone bearing her mother's name and placed upon it a new cloth doll, a reproduction made from old photographs, as a symbol of the child whose identity had finally been restored. After the funeral, she decided to stay in Pennsylvania, renting a small apartment in Harrisburg, and beginning to volunteer with Cold Case Survivors, a support group for survivors and families of unsolved cases. There, Mia shared her story in talks, not as a tragedy, but as proof of the power of memory and delayed justice. She spoke about how a tiny fingernail fragment could turn back time, about the people who never gave up even when 50 years brought only silence. Encouraged by Eleanor Reed, she gave presentations at the State Police Academy, where the Mill Creek case had become a standard teaching example in cold case investigation training. Lectures opened with the line, "No detail is meaningless if it is preserved long enough." Cadets viewed the entire process, file restoration, DNA matching, and interagency collaboration, as a model for handling lost records and aged evidence. In the classroom, when the archival images appeared, the dirt road, the pickup truck, and the 2012 reunion, Mia often sat quietly in the back, eyes steady. She also collaborated with the FBI on cold case legacy archiving projects, helping build databases of mid-20th century child disappearances. The name Mia Thompson, found alive, was engraved on the honor wall at State Police Headquarters as one of the very few long-term missing person victims located alive. Every year on June 12th, she returned to Mill Creek and placed a small bouquet beside the Old Town sign, now a stop for criminal justice student groups. In a short speech at the 2013 memorial ceremony, Mia said, "Sometimes what we are really searching for is not just the missing person, but the belief that the truth can still be found." Those words were later carved on the wall of the Cold Case Unit training room as a reminder to the next generation of officers that justice, even when it arrives late, still holds redemptive value for those left behind. When the Mill Creek case was officially closed, an interagency panel consisting of the FBI, the Department of Justice, and the Pennsylvania State Police was established to conduct a comprehensive review of the entire investigation process, comparing the two phases, 1957 and 2012, in order to draw lessons for future cold cases. The final report revealed stark differences between the two eras. In 1957, evidence preservation was rudimentary. There were no standardized DNA storage protocols, Crime scene photographs were damaged due to technical errors, and there was no mechanism for interstate coordination. Files were fragmented, data connectivity was lacking, and every lead reached a dead end. Local police at the time relied entirely on witness statements and logical deduction, while biometric identification technology did not yet exist. The fact that a tiny fingernail clipping, an overlooked piece of evidence for 55 years, became the key to solving the case was regarded as a classic example of the value of modern technology. In its analysis, the panel emphasized the role of DNA genealogy, the technology of extended genetic matching through civilian databases that allows tracing of blood relationships across multiple generations. It was the integration of data from public genetic databases with the CODIS system that made it possible to identify Mary Colson as Mia Thompson. The report stated clearly, without the development of gene tracing technology and expanded pedigree matching algorithms, the Mill Creek case would have remained on the permanent missing persons list. Beyond the technological factor, the report also highlighted the importance of multi-level coordination among agencies, local police, state forensic laboratories, and the FBI. The collaboration between investigative journalist Eleanor Reed and the Cold Case Unit was regarded as an effective model of civilian judicial partnership, opening a new approach to handling old files. The panel also recommended improving evidence management systems through digitization and long-term cryogenic preservation to prevent the kind of data loss that occurred in earlier periods. In the final summary, the Mia Thompson case was classified under Pennsylvania's Cold Case Solved exemplary list, alongside 5 other cases solved through DNA genealogy. The report noted, the Mill Creek case did not merely restore one person's identity, it also affirmed the power of science, human perseverance, and the justice system's ability to redeem itself across time. At the public announcement, Lieutenant Hunt delivered a short but deeply meaningful closing remark. The mistakes of 1957 were corrected by the technology and determination of 2012. We cannot change the past, but we can learn never to let silence stretch on for another century. Afterward, the name Mia Thompson, found alive, 1957-2012, was engraved on the memorial plaque in the Cold Case Hall of Honor in Harrisburg, closing the longest investigation in state history while ushering in a new era for cases once thought unsolvable. After the final report was released, the Mia Thompson case quickly became a national media focus. Major outlets such as the New York Times, CNN, and the Associated Press ran simultaneous stories under headlines like "Little Girl Missing for 55 Years Found Alive," calling it the miracle of modern DNA technology. Weekly television documentaries recreating the journey from Mill Creek to Florida attracted millions of viewers. However, alongside that massive attention came a wave of debate about the limits of media coverage in cold cases. Some outlets were criticized for excessively exploiting emotional elements and publishing private moments of Margaret and Mia without permission. Journalism ethics experts held forums at Columbia University asking whether retelling a painful story under television lights was inadvertently re-traumatizing the people involved. Meanwhile, forensic experts and investigators viewed the case as a different kind of lesson, not about individual tragedy, but about the value of evidence preservation. Numerous seminars were organized around issues of evidence storage, sealing procedures, and the standardization of federal DNA data. In Pennsylvania, the Department of Justice announced the Preserve to Solve program with a dedicated budget to build a long-term biological evidence storage system. The state legislature also passed a bill expanding the Cold Case Investigation Fund, increasing funding by 40% for units handling old cases. Part of this budget was named the Mia Thompson Grant, earmarked for projects involving evidence restoration or the application of genealogy technology in case solving. Law, journalism, and forensic science universities incorporated the case into their curricula as an exemplary case study at the intersection of technology, ethics, and social responsibility. The story also created a positive ripple effect. Dozens of families in other states began submitting DNA samples to national genealogy systems, in hopes of finding missing loved ones. In 2013 alone, Pennsylvania recorded 27 cold cases reopened, thanks to expanded genetic tracing mechanisms. From a cultural perspective, the Mia Thompson case was seen as a turning point in public understanding of time and justice, that an old case is never truly over as long as a single piece of evidence remains. A 4-part PBS documentary titled Found Alive: The Mill Creek Miracle aired nationwide, serving both as a memorial and a warning about the mistakes of the first generation of investigators. At the end of each episode, the words appeared on screen: "No detail is too small. No truth is ever forgotten." Thanks to this case, the concept of a cold case gradually ceased to be seen as dead files, and instead became sleeping memories waiting to be awakened, where technology, perseverance, and social responsibility converged to give voice back to people time seemed to have erased. In early 2014, the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Pennsylvania Department of Justice jointly signed the document officially closing the Mill Creek case, marking it solved in the National Cold Case Repository. The file numbered 57 MC004, once shelved for more than half a century, was archived among exemplary cases of belated justice restored. On the day the decision was announced in Harrisburg, everyone who had participated in the investigation was present: Lieutenant David Hunt, journalist Eleanor Reed, FBI representatives, and Mia Thompson herself, the former center of the story. During the ceremony, a commemorative plaque reading "Found Alive, 1957-2012" was installed in the Cold Case Hall of Honor, next to the permanently engraved words, "The truth does not disappear. It only waits to be found." After the file closing ceremony, Mia decided to stay in Pennsylvania permanently. She moved to a quiet small town near Harrisburg, filled with maple trees that reminded her of the Mill Creek of her childhood. Rather than flee the past, she chose to turn memory into purpose. She joined the state-funded Voices of the Missing program, providing psychological and legal support to families of missing persons. She often said during public talks that what matters is not the ending, but holding on to the belief that justice, however late, can still return. The lessons learned from the Mill Creek case were incorporated into training at the State Justice Institute, helping establish standardized procedures for evidence storage, interstate investigation, and nationwide application of DNA genealogy technology. The 186-page final report was made public by the state government in July 2014. It opened with a quote from Margaret Thompson: "As long as they keep looking, she will know the way home." The document not only detailed the entire investigation process, but also included recommendations for reforming file retrieval procedures, standardizing genetic analysis technology, and supporting cold case victims. The media called Mill Creek the genetic map of justice, while the FBI regarded it as proof that no missing persons case should ever be forgotten. At the final press conference, when asked if she considered herself a victim, Mia simply smiled and said, "I am the one who was found." That short answer later became the slogan engraved on the wall of the state's cold case investigation room. The story of the Mia Thompson case, the little girl who disappeared in Mill Creek in 1957 and was found 55 years later, is not only a closed investigation, it is also a profound reflection of the value of faith, technology, and community responsibility in modern American society. Looking at it from today's perspective, what ultimately delivered justice was no miracle, but the unwavering persistence of ordinary people: Margaret Thompson, who kept sending letters for decades; journalist Eleanor Reed, who dared to reopen a file everyone thought had gone cold; and the new generation of investigators who believed a tiny fingernail fragment could still speak the truth. In today's America, where issues like missing persons, human trafficking, and domestic violence still exist, the Mia Thompson story reminds us that every piece of evidence, every datum, no matter how small, can save a life if properly preserved, and if someone is patient enough not to let go. It also demonstrates the vital role of DNA genealogy, not merely a scientific tool, but a bridge connecting people to justice, past to present. Yet the deeper lesson lies in how society confronts pain, not by exploiting it for curiosity or sensationalism, but by transforming it into motivation to improve the legal system and protect the vulnerable. For every American today, the message of Mill Creek is clear. Believe in the value of memory, in the power of community, and in our ability to correct the mistakes of the past with truth, compassion, and technology used for the right purpose. Thank you for joining us on this journey of more than half a century to restore justice for Mia Thompson, the little girl from Mill Creek, all those years ago. If you believe there are still truths waiting to be uncovered, please subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring revived cold cases together in the next video.